How do you get people to change their behavior in what they use, how they commute to work, what sorts of, how much electricity they use, because all of these things lead to emissions, which are one of the biggest problems of climate change, right? So, which is causing climate change. So, you know, in India, electricity is expensive and people are conscious of how much electricity they use. But at the same time, where that electricity comes from is also important. So those large policy changes would have to happen at a different level, and that's a different engagement, right? So you're looking at policymakers who, where you get they get pressure from citizen groups to move to solar or wind or whatever else is renewable energy. And you're looking at also how else can you change behavior? So there are incentives. So you can do rebates and subsidies for things, so you change behavior through the price mechanism, right? So sort of speak like an economist a little bit, but basically if you change the price, you can either punish people or you can reward them, right? And so that's another big policy instrument that we haven't been very effective at using for climate change purposes. So I think that would be another, if you're looking at how a layperson can impact action at a higher level, is joining groups that are working to affect change at the policy-making level or at the legislation level, where you're trying to get rebates or you're trying to fine people for certain actions and activities so that they change behavior en masse, right? So it's for everybody that it changes behavior. You're not trying to convince everyone, you're just using that one mechanism of price to convince people. So you also have to be careful that you're not using it too much, because if you use it too much, then you have a revolt of some sort, and then that government gets, you know, in trouble. So that's why that's a difficult mechanism. Economists love it, but politicians don't.
Action has to be taken today. There is no tomorrow, and so they have to, at some level, start believing that it is for real. Changes are drastic and there will be no going back unless we do something today. How do we convince them of
If I knew the answer to that, we'd have done it, right? It's not that simple. So, so one big problem is that it's not an immediate life-threatening issue. It's something that's going to come down the road, right? So it's already happening, but when you look at high temperatures here in India, for example, temperatures that have been hotter. So this is the hottest year on record ever in history in the world, right? But instead of thinking of it as this is the hottest year, I would say we should think of it as this is the coldest year for the next 150. So it's just going to get hotter. And that's what we need to explain and bring out there to people. So your electricity bills are going to go up because you're going to use air conditioning if you can afford air conditioning. If you can't afford air conditioning, you know, you're going to have some trouble. You're going to have some health issues. If you're old and you cannot get your elderly parents to the hospital, or the electricity failures happen, then you're going to have some health issues, some fatalities, there are going to be all of these issues. They're already happening in India. So if it's going to get hotter and not cooler, and you're already seeing these impacts, and I think it's very logical as to what the results are going to be, which is you're just going to have more of what you have now. So more droughts, more rainfall and floods, more mosquito-borne diseases, more chemical and other wastes that have been flooded, and then heat-related deaths. That's going to be a big one. India actually is going to be one of the worst hit in the world. So India really needs to do something, and needs to help other countries do something as well. So it's not just India that's emitting, obviously. So this is why collective action is what needs to be taken at the global level, at the national level, and at the subnational as well as individual level. So we all need to be doing this collective action.
As of today, the common person doesn't even know how various pollinators, for example, impact the his crop produce. They don't even know that. So we need to come to that level. Science has to come to that level, only then everybody would join the effort.
Right. So I think that's a really good point. But it's difficult to explain to people all the intricate relationships if they're not interested in botany or pollinators so you're not going to grab a hold of people and say, hey, I want to tell you something about pollinators, you know. So I think that it really needs to meet people at their interest level. And it's really about, for us, we think about things like, if in Hawaii, for example, we have just, in Honolulu, there are very few roads, main roads, so if that road gets flooded, then it's very difficult to go to the grocery store. So it's a huge inconvenience. Okay, if it happens once in your lifetime, you may not care. But if it starts to happen every month, then that's going to be a pain, right? You're going to think about moving. So it may not be life-threatening, but it's a huge inconvenience. I think we need to meet some people at that level, that this is going to be an inconvenience. Then people who are more interested in things, I think we need to meet them at a different level where you're talking about more engagement with things like knowledge about pollinators, or people who care about species loss, people who care about maybe even how their gardens are going to do, or what their crops are going to do. So for farmers, that's going to be a different message. For the US military, that's a different message. So it's at different levels that message needs to happen.
Do some of these things need to be part of the syllabus for schools, for example, elementary schools? That isn't something that happened as yet. Can scientists start looking at, introducing it as part of the curriculum?
Yeah, so there are things happening like that.
At different levels. Mm-hmm. When I introduce it for primary classes, I am doing it at one level. When I am introducing it for colleges, I am doing it at different levels. So you are addressing different people at different levels of maturity.
Right. So there are also citizen groups that will engage people, not just at the school level, but sort of for anyone who, for example, if you're a gardener, if you're interested in gardening, there's a project, it's called Project Bud Burst, and it's, like bud, like a kali, and so it's called Project Bud Burst. And what you can do is, if you're a gardener, you go anywhere, and you notice some things about your environment, you can just fill out some of these information. It's like an app, and you can just fill it out, and you give it to them, and you say, this is where it was. They find the latitude, longitude, they find the points to it. And all of that individual information makes up a big data set for the scientists. So it's also a deeper level of engagement that you can do just living your own life. I mean, yeah, it's good to, cut down on the plastics and all of those things, and those are all individual actions that we're taking to destroy the planet. So we can certainly take some of those actions to keep the planet from being destroyed, right? So you can decide to use paper straws or not use straws. Good place to start for citizens to go beyond plastic bags. And trees do a lot of things. They don't just help with climate change, which of course is huge, but they help to stabilize a watershed, so your erosion issues are mitigated. So they help to, of course, provide the oxygen, and they sequester carbon dioxide, so they absorb carbon dioxide, so they sequester carbon. The soils in forests have actually sequester a lot of carbon, which means, so when I say sequester, I'm saying that they actually can absorb and keep it there. That helps us for reversing climate change. And they provide shade, they look beautiful. And so they have a lot of uses, and trees are wonderful to start with as an action, because you can create a forest. But it of course it has to be done again through in an organized fashion, so you actually grow these trees and they actually live, right? So you don't want to, it has to be implemented properly. But those are great projects. In Hawaii, we're also using those that method, which is to reforest and plant trees. We're trying to do it on state lands, as well. So here also in India, if the forestry department has lands that are not forested, that would be a good place to grow trees. If there are places where you cannot use trees, that would be a good place to have solar farms maybe, if you cannot grow anything else and it's sunny. So that would allow you to then generate electricity in a renewable, clean way. So I think those are all kinds of farming in the sense of solar farming and growing trees. Those are all good things for climate change action.